The document I pulled out of my bag that evening wasn't even dramatic. It was just a printout. 4 pages stapled in the corner, numbers in columns. My daughter-in-law took one look at it and said, "What is that?" And I said, "That's the answer to your question." She didn't ask another one after that. I've been a bookkeeper for 31 years, not an accountant. People always assume I mean accountant. No. A bookkeeper. I tracked the money that came in and the money that went out for a chain of dental offices in Mississauga, and then later for a property management company near Hamilton, and I was good at it. I am still good at it. Numbers sit still for me. They don't change their story depending on who's in the room. That has always been the thing I loved most about them. My son married his wife 6 years ago. I liked her then. I still do, in the way you like someone you've decided not to argue with anymore. She's not a bad person. She's just someone who grew up believing that the word family was a card you could lay on the table when you wanted something, and that whoever folded first was the one who loved more. I hadn't folded yet. But that dinner, the one in November, the one with the document, that was the night they found out I wasn't going to. My son is 34. He works in project management for a mid-size construction firm in the GTA. His wife works part-time at a physiotherapy clinic, 3 days a week, since the baby came. They own a semi-detached in Brampton that I helped them get into. Not gifted. Helped. I co-signed their mortgage 3 years ago when they were just short of qualifying on their own. The understanding, the one we all shook hands on metaphorically at the time, was that they would refinance in a few years, get my name off the title, and stand on their own. That was the plan. I was just the bridge. In November, they invited me for dinner to discuss some family stuff. My son used those exact words on the phone. Some family stuff. I know that phrase now. It means someone has been thinking about asking you for something for weeks and has finally rehearsed it enough to say it out loud. I arrived at 6. They'd made a roast. That should have been my first signal. They don't usually cook on a Tuesday. The table was set nicely. My granddaughter was already in bed, asleep, which meant they'd put her down early so the conversation could happen without interruption. I noticed all of this and said nothing. I ate the roast. I complimented the potatoes. I waited. It was my son who started. He set down his fork and said, "Mom, we've been doing a lot of thinking about daycare and about what things are going to look like over the next few years." He looked at his wife. She gave him the nod that means keep going. The cost is just, it's not working. Full-time daycare here is $2,200 a month. We've been on the wait list for a subsidized spot, but who knows when that comes through. And with the mortgage going up when it renews in the spring and everything else, I said, "How much is the renewal going to cost you?" He told me their rate was going from 2.4 to 5.1. Their monthly payment was going to increase by nearly $800. I nodded. I already knew this, approximately. I'd done the math when I'd heard about rate renewals in the news. I'd thought about them specifically. "So," he said, "we've been thinking, and we want you to know this comes from a place of love. We think it would actually be really beautiful if you retired. You're 63, Mom. You've worked your whole life. And if you retired, you could take care of Lily during the day, and it would solve the daycare problem, and you'd get all that time with her that you—" "I'm 62, I said. "What?" "I'm 62. I turned 63 in March." "Right. Okay, 62. Mom, you've worked so hard. This would be good for you too." I looked at my daughter-in-law. She was watching me with an expression I can only describe as carefully neutral. The expression of someone who has decided to let someone else carry the opening argument. I said, "And what would I live on?" My son said, "Your pension kicks in at 65, and you have your RRSPs. And obviously we would. We'd help where we could, where you could," I repeated. "Mom, I'm just clarifying the offer." His wife spoke then. She said, "We're not trying to take advantage of you. We're trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Lily loves you. You love her. Wouldn't this be better than strangers?" I said it was a good question. I asked if I could use the bathroom. They said of course. I went down the hall, closed the door, and stood in front of their mirror for about 45 seconds. Then I went back to the table, and I reached into my bag and I put the document on the table beside my plate. It was a spreadsheet. I had printed it that afternoon. I'd been building it for 2 weeks since my son had called and said he wanted to talk about some family stuff. The first page was their household income. My son makes $94,000 a year. His wife, working 3 days a week, makes about $31,000. Combined, $125,000 gross. After tax, roughly $86,000, or about $7,100 a month. The second page was their expenses, as best as I could reconstruct them from what I knew and what I'd observed. Mortgage as it stood, $2,040 monthly. Renewal projection, $2,840. Car payments. They had 2 vehicles, both financed. I'd seen the stickers when they bought them. A Highlander and a Mazda CX-5, both 2023 models. Combined payment, approximately $1,400. Insurance on both, probably $320. Groceries, I estimated conservatively at $900. Their gym memberships, I knew about those because my son mentioned them. About $120 combined. Their streaming services, phones, internet, probably $260. The country club. That was the line I highlighted. My son belongs to a golf club in Caledon. He joined 2 years ago. I don't know what he pays, because he has never told me directly, but I know these clubs, and I know that area, and I put in a conservative estimate of $350 a month. My daughter-in-law saw the highlight and her expression changed. The point, I said, is that on paper, after all of this before daycare, you have roughly $400 a month left over. That is genuinely tight. I understand that. What I'm trying to show you is where the tightness is coming from. My son said, "Mom, we're not here to have our budget criticized." I said, "I know. You're here to ask me to retire 3 years early and give up approximately $78,000 in income over those 3 years to solve a cash flow problem. I'm just making sure we're both looking at the same picture." Silence. I turned to page 3. Page 3 was my numbers. My pension, if I retired now at 62, would give me about $1,400 a month, reduced because I'd be drawing it early. My CPP, if I claimed at 62 rather than 65, would be significantly reduced as well. I had my RRSPs, yes, but drawing them down now rather than at 65 meant losing the compounding and paying higher tax on the withdrawals. I had run all of this. The difference between retiring now and retiring at 65 was, over the rest of my life expectancy, somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 in total income. I did not put that on the spreadsheet in large font. I put it in the same size as everything else. But I said it out loud. Retiring now versus at 65 costs me, on average, around $220,000 over my lifetime. That's the ask. My daughter-in-law said, "That's not your framing it." "I'm framing it as math," I said. "Is the math wrong?" She didn't answer. My son said quietly, "Mom, it's not just about the money." "I know," I said. "You also need my name on the refinance." That landed differently. He sat back slightly, because that was the other thing. That was actually the reason the dinner had happened in November specifically, before spring. They needed to refinance the mortgage before their rate renewed, and to qualify at the new stress test rate. With his income alone, they would still be short. They needed me on the mortgage again. Which meant they needed me employed. Which meant the ask, "Retire so you can watch Lily," was, financially, impossible to execute at the same time as the ask, "Stay on the mortgage so we can refinance." You cannot be a retired 62-year-old on a fixed income and also be the cosigner that gets a young couple through a stress test. I had found this contradiction 2 weeks ago, when I first sat down with the numbers. I had wondered if they'd noticed it. They had not. I let it sit on the table for a moment. Then I said, "If I retire, I lose the income that makes me useful on your mortgage application. So you can have one or the other, not both." My son put his hand over his face. His wife said, "We didn't. We thought." "I know," I said. "I think you thought I could do both. You can't. The bank won't see it that way." We sat with that for a moment. Outside, it had started to snow. One of those early November snows that doesn't stick but makes everything look briefly quiet. Then I turned to page 4. The last page. Page 4 was a single question printed in the middle of the sheet. I debated whether to include it. I decided to, because I wanted them to see that I had thought about this carefully, and that I wasn't being cruel, I was being clear. The question was, who is watching Lily on the 3 days per week that my daughter-in-law currently works? I knew the answer. I had known for about 4 months. My daughter-in-law's mother, her name is Rosemary, she's 58, she lives in Oakville, comes to Brampton 3 days a week to watch Lily, and she is paid for it. I don't know exactly how much. But my son had mentioned once, in a conversation he probably thought I'd forgotten, that they were helping Rosemary out a bit. I had stored that away. I looked at my daughter-in-law and I said, I don't think this is about not being able to afford childcare. I think this is about not wanting to pay for it. She opened her mouth, closed it. I said, your mom watches Lily 3 days a week. I'm guessing you're contributing to her expenses in some way. I'm not criticizing that. She's doing a service and she should be compensated. But you're asking me to do the same service for free, while also giving up my income, while also staying on your mortgage. Those things don't fit together. My son said, Mom, I know it's uncomfortable, I said. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I love you. I love Lily. I would love to spend more time with her. I do spend time with her. Every second weekend, we do things together. That's not nothing. But what you're describing is a full-time job, and I already have one. My daughter-in-law said very quietly, I didn't realize you knew about my mom. I didn't bring it up to embarrass you, I said. I brought it up because I think you need to see the whole picture the same way I had to see it. My son said nothing for a long time. He was looking at the document. His wife was looking at her plate. Then he said, What are we supposed to do about the daycare? And this was the part I had also prepared for, because I am, at my core, someone who believes that if you're going to close a door, you should try to show people the window, I said. Let me tell you what I actually found. The subsidized childcare situation in Ontario has improved since the federal deal came through. The $10 a day childcare program, it's not everywhere yet, but it's expanding. There are licensed nonprofit centers with spots that come available. You have to be on multiple wait lists, not just one. I had looked into this. I gave them the names of 3 centers in Brampton that had shorter waits than the ones they'd registered with. I'd also found a licensed home daycare provider, a woman with excellent reviews who had a spot opening in January, charging $1,200 a month, not $2,200. That was a saving of $1,000 per month right there. On the mortgage side, I told them I would stay on the refinance. I would keep my name on it. But I wanted 2 things in writing. A timeline, 18 months, by which they would work toward qualifying without me, and an agreement that we would revisit their budget together in January with a proper financial advisor, not just my spreadsheet, but a real CFP who could help them restructure. My son looked up. He said, You'd stay on the mortgage? Yes, I said. As long as we have a clear exit plan. Why would you do that if? Because you're my son, I said, and because the goal was never to punish you. The goal was to make sure we were both reading the same page. He nodded slowly. He looked tired. He looked, honestly, a little relieved. The way people look when someone else has done the hard thinking and laid it out clearly, and all they have to do is sit with it. His wife said, I'm sorry. I think we thought it would be simpler than it was. I said, most things are less simple than they look from the outside. We didn't finish the roast. We had tea. My son showed me some new photos on his phone of Lily at the park, this little person with her rubber boots and her serious expression. She looks like him, around the eyes. She has her mother's chin. I stayed for about an hour after the documents were put away, and it was just the 3 of us talking about ordinary things, the way families do when the hard conversation is over, and everyone is deciding, quietly and without saying so, to still be a family. I drove home on the 410, the snow still not quite sticking. I thought about my mother, who had sold furniture to help my brother with a down payment decades ago and never got a cent back and never mentioned it once. I used to think that was generosity. Now, I think it was just a different era, one where you didn't ask questions, you just gave. I've always been grateful she could give. I've always thought it cost her something she never calculated. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a minute before going inside. I thought, I brought the numbers. They had the dinner. It's not a perfect situation. I suspect the next 18 months will have their moments. But we'll get there. We usually do, in this family. We just sometimes need someone to print things out.